We are seeking to understand and gain insights about Iowa House File 802 as it relates to K-12 education. We want to teach, excuse me, so we want to reflect on the implications and empowerment for your classroom. We want to strategize and discuss ways to do this work in your classroom, to embed this work in your curriculum. And we're so excited to hear from some students about that as well. We want to uplift those student voices and discuss their responses to justice-driven education. Hearing from them matters, and we want to recommit. So consider your role in this work and commit to this partnership together. We just want to be clear that tonight, understand that we don't have all the answers regarding House File 802, and that this event is a conversation and not legal counsel. We have to understand that those of us committed to equity and justice work will face pushback at times from people in power, because teaching about race in your classroom is a risk. But here's the thing, not teaching about race in your classroom is a bigger risk. So we believe having real conversations with students about these issues is part of social justice work. It's critical work. It's the right work. And we hope that tonight is the beginning of establishing a network, a community, a cohort of educators who are committed to that and can support each other. Thank you for being here.
And we are so excited to just initially introduce the panelists that we have joining us this evening, who are lending their time and their brilliance to just clarify some things for us and engage in this conversation. So first off, Andre Wright, a designer, activist, true visionary, recently crowned Entrepreneur of the Year for Eastern Iowa, a community builder and world traveler who has dedicated his life to this work. Since launching his own fashion brand out of the Midwest, he's grown Humanize My Hoodie into a global fashion activism movement, designing hoodies for rappers, Black liberation leaders, allies, Black youth, while staging fashion shows, workshops, and educating thousands of people. So Andre, if you want to come off mute, just say hello to the crowd tonight.
Hi, everybody, and I'm excited to be here to share space and provide some comments to tonight's discussion. Nice to meet everybody.
Thanks, Andre.
Our next panelist is Allison Molman. She was valedictorian of Cedar Rapids Prairie High School's class of 2005 and received a full ride Matthew Shepard Scholarship for her work advocating for LGBTQ students in the College Community School District. In 2009, Allison graduated with highest distinction and honors from the University of Iowa, with a BA in Women's Studies and a minor in Religious Studies. She earned her JD from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law in 2012, and then moved to Alabama to work for the Equal Justice Initiative as an attorney. Through her work at EJI over the last 9 years, Allison has represented people on death row and children who have been sentenced to die in prison. She also does public education work around the nation's history of racial injustice. And Allison, welcome. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And our final panelist tonight is Stephanie Munsterman Scriven. She is the executive director of the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission, an agency that provides education and outreach to community and works to prevent and eliminate discrimination. Stephanie leads the strategic direction, community engagement, policy vision, operations, and performance on the commission. Prior to this work, she was in nonprofit sector in the US and globally. Originally from Kansas City, Missouri, and her experience growing up financially and home insecure drives her desire to give back to the community and create transformational change. She was also just appointed to United States leadership panel over at the Civil Rights Commissions, which is very exciting of an honor as well. So welcome, Stephanie. We're glad you're with us tonight.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to speak with this group. And I just have to give you a heartfelt appreciation to all the teachers and educators. As a mom, thank you. As a community member, thank you. Thank you for your dedication. I know you have competing priorities, but truly nothing contributes more to our country's betterment and development than teachers. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And we are actually going to stop screen share and go right in to talking about House File 802. Just a recommendation for viewing, if you click on the little icon on the right of your screen and click speaker, You're going to see in a big box the person speaking the whole time. If you would like to do that, that's just a recommendation. Allison, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's also fine to leave me like an inch tall. I'm fine with that. But like Leanne said, my name's Allison Molman. I'm originally from Cedar Rapids, and I'm a proud Hawkeye, and I'm really thrilled to speak with you all tonight. I'm also from a family of educators. My grandmother was a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my wife's an educator. And so I really hold teachers and educators dear to my heart, and know that the things that I've accomplished thus far in life wouldn't have been possible without wonderful educators that came along the way. So thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm hoping that this is going to be an encouraging discussion. I know that when I first heard about HF 802 and read about it, I was very scared. I was like, this is terrible for Iowa. It's going to really, really hurt our educators, our schools. But when I started to dig in and look at what the law actually says and what it does, I was encouraged, because I don't think it does as much as people are trying to scare us into thinking. And so what I wanted to do tonight is spend some time talking about what HF 802 does and what it doesn't do. And I hope that after we go over those things that you guys will be encouraged, like I was, that some of the aims that these legislators sought in terms of stifling conversations, the bill's not going to do that if we're brave. So we'll start with what HF 802 addresses, and that's 9 divisive concepts. That's the language used in the bill in training and education. I'm going to go through each of these 9 concepts, and as we're going through them, I think you'll think, as I did, I don't think any teachers are doing this anyway. So if some of it sounds a little bit ridiculous, like you're thinking like the rest of us, most of these things that they're trying to bar have not been happening in Iowa schools, and I don't think any teachers would ever advocate for teaching to students. So the first one is that the law prohibits teaching the idea that one race or sex is superior to another race or sex. I don't know any teachers that would teach that a certain race or a certain sex is superior to another. So that, in my opinion, doesn't do a lot. The second, teaching that the United States and Iowa are fundamentally or systematically racist or sexist is prohibited. This piece is largely in response to the 1619 Project and other projects like that have sought to tell a truthful account of what our nation's history is. When we go in a minute to talk about what HF 802 doesn't do, I think you'll see that we're still allowed to talk about history. We're still allowed to talk about slavery. We're still allowed to be honest about our nation's history, justice. So I just want to like put a pin in that second one, because I think that one can be the one that's most scary for people. The third divisive concept that's barred is the idea that an individual race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. When we talk about white supremacy, we're not talking about white people being inherently racist. When we talk about sexism, we're not talking about men, all being, it's about systems, it's not about individuals. And so that third one is really focusing on something that we're not doing when we're being honest, talking about race, white supremacy, and other areas. The fourth divisive concept that the law seeks to bar is discrimination or adverse treatment of an individual because of their race or sex. I'm on board with that. And I think most educators would be. We don't want to be teaching children or anyone that discrimination or adverse treatment is okay. All educators would agree that those are things that aren't good in classrooms and that wouldn't be promoted. The fifth concept is that members of one race should not attempt to treat others without respect based on race or sex. Absolutely, that's often like one of the top 3 rules in any classroom is that we're going to respect each other. So again, it's a concept that it's not in reality a problem in our classrooms, that teachers are trying to tell their students that they should treat others differently because of their race or sex. The sixth concept is that the idea that an individual's morals are determined by race or sex. Again, I don't think that any educators are trying to do that. The seventh is the idea that traits like the hard work ethic are racist or sexist is prohibited. So I think that what they're again pulling on that kind of relates to the second one that we talked about that I wanted to put a pin in, that when we're being honest about history, sometimes these concepts and things can come up, that we're not saying they're inherently racist or anything like that. It's just being honest about history. So we'll talk more about those in a second. But then the last two go in together, and I think we'd all agree that it shouldn't happen in a classroom anyway. One, that race or sex scapegoating is prohibited. None of us want that in classrooms. And that race or sex stereotyping is prohibited. Again, I think we can all get on board with that. So when I read those 9 concepts, I was like, oh, this doesn't say anything about critical race theory. This doesn't say anything about slavery, about history, about being honest. Like, that's encouraging, but I was like, but what is there in there that's actually going to protect educators? And fortunately, there is some language in the bill that protects educators that do want to be honest about race and about history and about what's happened in this country. So I want to just draw everyone's attention to some parts of the bill that will protect educators that are doing this important work. And I'm going to quote 4 parts of the bill that I think are really important. The first is that HF 802 does not inhibit or violate the First Amendment rights of students or faculty, or undermine a school district's duty to protect to the fullest degree intellectual freedom and free expression. The intellectual vitality of students and faculty should not be infringed under this section. So when you're having conversations in your classroom and students are asking about race and talking about race, you can allow those conversations to happen and should encourage them. There's nothing in this bill that says that you have to step in and stop those types of conversations. Free expression, First Amendment rights are encouraged under this law. Okay, the second part is what it says it doesn't do. It doesn't prevent a school district from promoting racial, cultural, ethnic, intellectual, or academic diversity or inclusiveness, provided that such efforts are consistent with the provisions of this section. So again, it's okay to talk about these concepts. It's not that these are all off the table. It just, we have to be kind of strategic about how we talk about them so that we're not getting in trouble with those 9 divisive concepts. The law also doesn't prohibit discussing specific defined concepts as part of a larger course of academic instruction. And it doesn't prohibit, this is the part that I think is most important, it doesn't prohibit the use of curriculum that teaches the topics of sexism, slavery, racial oppression, racial segregation, or racial discrimination, including topics relating to the enactment and enforcement of laws resulting in sexism, racial oppression, segregation, and discrimination. So what that tells me is that we can be honest about our nation's history of racial injustice under HF 802. We may not be able to attach certain buzzwords to it that the legislature is concerned about. We might not be able to call it critical race theory. It's not critical race theory anyway. But we're still allowed to be honest about racism, sexism, and all these things that educators should be talking about in their classrooms. And so when I read this bill, it is scary. It's designed to be scary. It's designed to kind of scare educators from even touching these issues. But when you look at those 4 provisions that I highlighted, there's actually some protection in there. And so everything that it was designed to do, it's all going to depend on how everything plays out with educators and people taking risks. But if you have supportive principals, superintendents, I hope that they will also talk to their legal counsel and look at this bill and see that you're still allowed and should be talking about racism, white supremacy, all these really important issues in our classrooms.
Thank you. And I am going to really briefly put up, we have the gist of what Allison just shared on a slide. So let me share that with you if you want to take a picture, or you can just check it out in the resource document. So I'll just hold these. That's not what I wanted to do, I'm sorry. I'll just hold these on the screen for a moment if you wanted to take a screenshot. So we start with she chatted a little bit about what we know and what we don't know.
So question, is there a way that we can get a copy of the slides?
Yes, we have all this information in a resource document for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet. These were the 9 divisive concepts. And the things that HF 802 explicitly does not do.
There's one more thing real quick. It's a very short law. It's a few pages. And so I would recommend just taking some time. I know that I don't really like reading some laws either, and I'm a lawyer, so I know that most people don't. But I do think it's helpful, and it is pretty straightforward compared to some of the other laws that get passed. And so having that handy, especially if you need to advocate for your rights, it might be good to print out and have on hand.
And we have that in your resource document too. There's a link to that as well. So great point. So we're going to turn to the panelists now and just invite them to enter into conversation together about this. And starting, so Andre and Stephanie, would you just share a little bit of the standouts or takeaways that you had from what Allison discussed? Andre, it'd be great too if you could talk a little bit about the kind of climate that exists in Iowa around equity and race that could cause this type of legislation to come into play. And then I know, Stephanie, we would love to hear about some of the work that's happening in Cedar Rapids and across Iowa with the Civil Rights Commission. So I'll just open it up now for the 3 of you to talk a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Listening to Allison's, explanation of what this bill is, it's been interesting for me just trying to understand, because like you said, none of this stuff was actually related to what's happening in Iowa. The reason why we started doing educational programming is to bring people's awareness and their palate up to speed so they know what's going on in this space, particularly in the Midwest, where I feel like we get some of the, as a Black man, we get some of the worst treatment in the country. If you look at the incarceration rates, you look at home ownership, you look at, literacy scores in school, you look at math scores in school, you look at who gets suspended in school. And this dates back to when I graduated, and I don't start thinking how old I am, but back to 97. And so we've been dealing with this issue for a very, very long time. And, if we talk about equity and what's actually changed in Iowa, I can't say a whole lot has. But what I will say is that the awareness of white supremacy, microaggressions, macroaggressions, implicit bias, gaslighting, all these terms, people are now more familiar with those terms, meaning that they have a little bit of education. But I feel like, there's still a whole section where we need to be actionable, right? Like we need to do things. And I look at what actually happened in the election. I look at all these things, and what is basically happened is because, the right's not in office right now. They're like, well, you know what? Before anybody start having any more conversations about this stuff, let's scare the hell out of them and make sure that we can get rid of these conversations. But again, like I said before, we weren't even talking about critical race theory. The reason why we started doing the work we were doing is because the stuff was not in the curriculum. How are we still talking about Christopher Columbus, and we still have statues that represent Christopher Columbus in front of our state capitol, but yet we have Indigenous Peoples Day, but we're not banning Christopher Columbus Day? So what's the truth? So this isn't a whole knack to not really tell the truth and to really whitewash, what's really happening to our kids and our babies in school. So that's why we've been so active and why we've been so aggressive. While we need to get education, we also need to be doing things, proactive things in the schools to, really change the climate so we can have a better environment. We can create better humans. So I'll use my word humans, right? And so I appreciate your comments about what educators can actually do to kind of get around the critical race theory conversation. And there's one person in Iowa, one educator in Iowa, and I believe what she's doing is she's teaching her class about what this bill actually covers, which will allow her then to open up a discussion around what is these terms, like what is white supremacy and why are they having these terms in there, and why don't they even want us to talk about this stuff, right? And so I find it very interesting, and I feel like, you know, teachers now, they have to get a little bit more creative with their curriculum and how they actually introduce topics to students, right? Like I was meeting with a group of educators probably about a year ago, and you know, they were talking about a lot of different things, metrics and all this different stuff, but everybody doesn't learn on the same level. And so what I asked the educators, I said, hey, you know, you got to dig into your heart. You got to go to where you first, why are you even doing this? Like, screw all the curriculum and all this, but why are you even an educator? Because, you know, we send our kids to school expecting them to have these type of results. And, you know, I don't know if the results are coming out the way we really want them at this point, you know. And so these conversations that we're having via Zoom, face to face, they're very critical just to keep the conversation going, and figure out ways to, you know, get around that bill, really just get around it to really create some equity, because we don't have true equity, especially not in this state. And I'll be the first one to say that, as a person who works in this space and knows a lot of different educators. And in fact, my business partner is an educator. He's been an educator for 11 something years. So I'm very versed when it comes to this topic. So yeah.
Yeah, Andre, lots of gratitude for that. And I appreciate just the points you're elevating. And I'm noticing just everyone in the chat, like, well, everyone, also a lot of Leanne and myself, but, you know, because we get hyped at these things, but really grateful just centering us on that why, like, especially as educators, we see disparities, we see these challenges in the ways the system we're a part of is causing more harm. So like, we have to be brave, we have to be bold, we have to remember our why and press into doing the right work. And Stephanie, I just want to kind of transition into you and just invite you to unmute and kind of share your comments, thoughts, funneling both off Allison and what Andre have shared.
Definitely. I'm with everybody else. The first time I heard about this, I was incredibly concerned, not only from education, but also working for a government agency that does civil rights. I was concerned that it's going to limit our ability to combat discrimination and to raise up equity. But digging into it more, there are ways to still do our work and still do our work very effectively. There are some folks who believe that racism stopped in 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. We know that is not the case. I still have a job. If there was not discrimination, I would not work at the Civil Rights Commission. As you know, Andre said, there are disparities across all of the systems, not just in education, but we're looking at the justice system, we're looking at the health system, we're looking at, you know, housing, we're looking at employment. It's systemic. One thing about the commission I'm going to talk about just briefly is, in the past, the main focus of our agency was to be more reactive around discrimination complaints and enforcement of civil rights law and anti-discrimination law. Now, we acknowledge and we believe it's very important to enforce those laws. It is absolutely necessary because it still happens. And we encourage the public to contact us, or if you're in another city, contact your local civil rights agency. Iowa is one interesting state that if a city has a population of 29,000 or more, there has to be a local agency of civil rights or human rights. And that is not the same as any other state. So please do contact your local organization. If you're in Cedar Rapids, call me. But secondly, the commission, the biggest piece of our work in my mind is engaging in the community to prevent and to eliminate discrimination, to prevent and eliminate disparities, and to increase equity. In the March of 2020, I became the director of the Civil Rights Commission, and the overarching goal, my North Star, has been do all that we can to create a community of belonging. Belonging is more than just being seen. It talks about having a meaningful voice and the opportunity, this is the important part, the opportunity to participate in the design of cultural and social structures. Now that includes education. And so to work towards building that community of belonging, the commission has the responsibility, and not just the Cedar Rapids Commission, these are commissions across the state from, Iowa City, Davenport, Dubuque, across the state. We have the responsibility to bring people together to provide a safe, inclusive, and welcoming spaces. And it's essential that we listen to our community members and we understand and respond to their needs. There's often that gap. We listen, we understand, and then we're like, okay, there it goes. So what at the commission we do, and other agencies do as well, is we partner with other organizations to create those sustainable solutions towards betterment of civil rights and human rights and equity. And so that includes, going into schools and talking to the students. That is honestly one of my favorite things on earth, is going into the classrooms and talking with the kids. Obviously that happened a whole lot more pre-COVID. I had the opportunity to talk to about 5,000 or 6,000 kids over about 5 years. And we talk about a variety of topics, from LGBTQI+ issues to bullying to just how can I be more welcoming, how to be an upstander or an advocate or an activist, civil rights history. I think one of my most interesting ones was going to a math class and talking about how we use statistics in our investigation of discrimination complaints. And so we find education to be the biggest area in which we can have the biggest impact, because we're able to reach the kids. And like I said earlier, teachers, you have the biggest impact on our country, the biggest platform in our country. And it's an honor when you share that with us, when you allow me to come into your classrooms. We also have had, just community conversations around equity. We partnered with United Way to talk about inequities in the financial world, in health, in education. And then what can we as individuals and what can we as a community do to create that community of belonging? I believe it's not only an individual responsibility, it's our collective responsibility. And so I know this bill, like we said earlier, at first it was scary. I mean, it's meant to be a scare tactic, and it works because I'll be frank, it's poorly written and it's very confusing. And I thank you all again for showing up tonight to try to work and find ways that we can still, teach our kids these important things, because if we don't talk about them, transformative change is not going to happen. So that's a few of my thoughts about the commission and some of the work we're doing.
Thank you too, Stephanie, I think all the educators, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think just being seen and feeling validated and like the importance of the work of education, but also this extreme burden that comes with that. And now this is an added layer of stress. I want to kind of turn it now to just a dialogue and kind of bring the rest of the crew into the conversation a little bit. And so to have a little bit of order around this, if you have a question, something specific for the panelists, there's one or two ways that you can engage. The first is go ahead and put your question in the chat. Leanne and myself will kind of uplift that to the panelists, and we'll just take some time for them to share their responses. The other one is if you want to come off mute, maybe you have, a specific situation or something you want some insight on, feel free to raise your hand. Use that raise hand feature, and we'll then call on you to come off mute, just so it's not lots of people talking over each other. And I want to uplift just to start. Jenny Schmidt put in the chat, all of this is spot on, but can we talk about the language in the bill about diversity trainings? My concern is that any attempt to do further education and advocacy will be shut down, either from perhaps baseless challenges, but also from sheer fear of community backlash. So I don't know who wants to, maybe Allison wants to kick that off since you're our legal expert, and then we can have Andre and Stephanie add thoughts as well. But I think there's some that might also flow really well to you coming in the chat. So.
Yeah. So I think that that's a really reasonable and valid fear. So much of this language, like what is a diversity training? I mean, it's a big umbrella that you could fit a lot of different things under. And so whenever I look at the law, like that's scary, but it also is like a bit of protection too, because there's always an argument that what you're doing would not fall underneath that. So I think that we have to think hard about like how we're defining these things and look for guidance from your principals, from your superintendents, from their legal counsel. I am a lawyer and I'm a legal expert, I guess, but that's more so if you're convicted of capital murder in Alabama. So I don't want to give like too much specific advice on like how you should handle diversity trainings in your own school. I just want to emphasize that like there is a lot of leeway in the law. And so have those conversations with your administrators and with your district and try to pull them into things. I did a conversation last month with the College Community School District, and I was really encouraged to see that my former school district and the superintendent there is trying to think critically about how to do this. And so and to be honest, I didn't necessarily expect that from my old school district. And so it was a really like great thing to see. I think that there's more of us that are on board with doing these things in our classroom than we may realize. And so opening up that dialogue is important to pull in as many allies as you can so that you're not doing this on your own.
Yeah, thanks for that. And again, a reminder, right? We are engaging in a dialogue here, right? Like, yes, I did kind of put Allison on the spot there, which is my bad, right? This is not like, you can't submit this in court being like, see, these people told me this. Okay, so it's this conversation, digging into that. Leanne, you came off mute. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to speak for 1 second about what Jenny was saying. That is absolutely a possibility, and it's happened. And I'm sure Andre and Stephanie know this too. I've lost contracts in the past 6 to 12 months for this exact reason. So that's a reality. And some of it is, can you consider what you're naming things to the degree that it still is authentically the thing, right? Culturally responsive teaching is another framework to talk about this under. So I just wanted to put that out there. Some ways that, if you don't want to call it, for one company, I had to change the word training to conversation, and we still had the exact same thing. So as long as you're not changing the integrity of the work and the honesty of the work, sometimes you can just change the name and it can keep going.
Yeah, I was going to add, as someone who has multiple trainings and workshops a week, yeah, it's just getting creative with how you present the information. And our most recent workshop is called Educators as Allies. But we have all the same information that we would normally have in our ally workshops. You can call it diversity training if you want to, but what we're saying is that our teachers need to be more allies to the students. And how do you do that, right? And we give you steps and real ways to be allies to students, because that's what they really need in school. They need allies. They need people to not only be their teacher, but they need someone else to love up on them, right? Certain students need different things from different people, and we recognize that. And so by having these platforms, it gives us a way to be creative and not say diversity training. I think another word you could use is cultural competency training, right? It's just being more culturally aware of your surroundings, which I feel like everyone needs to have, right? Even for me, I would say I was very ignorant about the Asian culture. So what did I do? I went to Asia. I went to Southeast Asia, and I traveled there so I can learn the culture, so I can be less ignorant about their culture. So same with anyone else. It's about, how do you learn more about someone who doesn't identify like you, and then also be able to, let your guard down a little bit and allow them to be a part of your life in some kind of capacity, whether it be in a classroom or even outside of the classroom sometimes. And I don't know all the rules with all that, but I know, I'm not an educator, I'm not a lawyer, but I've stepped into schools and I've taught kids. I didn't expect them to get any credit, but I gave them the game and what I knew. As a civic citizen of the community, we should all be teaching our youth something, right? And so I think it's just the way you spin it and the way you kind of word it, where you're not saying diversity training. If you feel like you're going to get in trouble for saying diversity training, then don't say diversity training. Still go down the same path that you would before, but just change the wording a little bit. Change to, you got to, I guess, finagle the system. Is a better word. So,
And teachers, let's take a page from our students on this, right? I'm going to add a little, humor, right? They can finagle. I didn't really say that. Well, I don't really, just like lean into that, right? Play with them a little. I want to, and I know, you know what I'm saying? Middle school teacher here. So Stephanie, before you kind of add, I want to add another layer to this that I'm kind of seeing a pattern coming up in comments as well. Is some hesitancy about just that divisive concept and who gets to define what that is, especially when it talks about such a subjective thing as feelings, right? Any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish, or psychological distress. And then that leads back up to a question we had earlier from Rita, this idea of maybe people twisting what we're saying, or we talk about systemic racism. Well, that isn't a system. You're talking about white people only. And so just kind of, can you guys add to maybe your comments and speak to that idea a little bit as well?
Certainly. The key word in that is should. It should make you feel guilty. And of course, you cannot control how somebody is going to feel. I am a white woman and I do feel guilty, but I do feel guilty for my ancestors' behavior, but it's not because somebody purposely said, Stephanie, you should feel this way because you're learning this information. Going back to what Andre, Allison were saying, in my years of training and working this field, I have never once called diversity training a diversity training, even pre this, because that word in and of itself, people just don't like. And so I've used the word conversation. I've used the word community conversation. And then to say, we're going to discuss this topic. And maybe it feels like you're just being too soft, but you're able to get the information out there. And so I do understand the fear. This legislation, frankly, it's almost like a pendulum in the civil rights world that we have seen. So the murder of George Floyd and other high-profile killings of Black people last summer, as we all know, prompted a surge of civic response. And I received way more phone calls and emails last year than I have in my previous 10 years of working in civil rights. People asking for, how do I do better? How can I support my friends that are people of color? What can I do for my BIPOC family friends? So not surprisingly, this legislation is a reactive attempt to curb teachings that challenge those dominant narratives about the role of race in the country and the history of identity, which historically are centered on white people's perspectives. So in my opinion, Stephanie's opinion, this legislation is just a return or an attempt to return to the status quo of power. And like Andre said earlier, the whitewashing of our history. And when we do this, our students, it chills the necessary conversation. It can chill the necessary conversation and opportunity, not only just about these topics, but for critical thinking. They should be able to identify and critique causes of social inequities in their own lives and understand that, as well as in their communities. And as you all know, this might cause educators to self-censor your lessons out of concern, like you said in the statement earlier, and that limits what our kids are learning. And students and adults, we need to learn our history, all of our history, and we need to work to come to terms with it. And we need to understand teaching students about historical and contemporary expressions of racism, like housing segregation, disparities in policing, the criminal justice system, education inequities, it's important for them to understand how racism works, how it still is a real problem for communities of color, and it's a problem for white people. We are the ones that are perpetuating this and not allowing our communities to get stronger. This does not, I mean, this goes back to that should. This does not, we're not teaching students that they should feel guilty for being white or they should feel guilty for being a white male. It doesn't call the entire United States or the state of Iowa racist. There are systems within, and there are policies within all of our states and Iowa that have the impact of racism. And understanding this allows us to have a more holistic understanding about these issues and their impact. And it's so important for students to learn about racism. Otherwise, how can they work to change it if they don't know it? You have to identify it to change it. And if it's not acknowledged, it continues to be swept underneath the rug and no progress is changed. And I know, Leanne and Brianna said this earlier, that this is hard work. I mean, working in education, working in the field of law, working in the field of civil rights and human rights, it's hard. And you have to have thick skin. I appreciate all that you do and being pulled in so many ways. There is some risk. And I'm asking you to be willing to this might sound cliche, but put the greater good. I mean, it's important for our country. It's important for our students to have the opportunity to learn these things so we can be better. If they don't know, we can't get any better. So that is, I put myself out there as a civil rights person. I say things I probably shouldn't say publicly, but it's a risk I have to take. Yeah, whatever, who cares? But it's a risk I have to take because it's important. It's important to our country and it's important to our kids. So.
What's interesting about the bill in general is the timing of it, right? Right when people started learning the terminology, right when people started to, stand up for themselves, right when we started to fight back, they like, hey, you know what? We're gonna use our strong hand and we're gonna make a bill that makes it so no educators, which, like you said, are some of the most important human beings on this earth because they deal with our babies all day, right? They're so important. We're going to stop them from teaching these guys, right? Because education is the key to everything. Because once we are educated and we know more, we got knowledge, we can accomplish a lot of different things as humans, right? And so for them to try to put something in place to scare educators, I feel is the most dangerous thing that's happened in a long while. And I want to be clear that you guys know that we're all in the middle of this war. As much as we want to play in the same sandbox and we talk about inclusivity and diversity, I don't believe we can actually get there until we actually have some equality for the people that are on the bottom. So until we actually have anything, until we have something, it's like, okay, I'll make an analogy. I have 10% of something and you guys have 90%, and you're telling me to come be inclusive. How the hell am I supposed to be inclusive? I only got 10%. Can I at least get up to 50 first? So that's the conversation I want to have. It's like, let us get up to 50%. Let us have some things of our own. And then we can have this really, really wonderful, inclusive conversation with flowers and butterflies and all these different things. But I want us to understand that we're in the middle of a race war. And if no one else is going to say it on this call, I'm going to say it because I'm Black and I'm the one who's getting targeted. I got a big target on my back. So the work that I do is it's actionable. It's not so much about talking about this stuff. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you actually going to do? Like we can sit on these Zooms and we can have conversation and we can talk till we're blue in the face. But until we got a coalition of 62 people like this actually doing actions, we ain't doing nothing. We'll be talking till we blue in the face. Everybody about to leave this conversation and go eat some food and watch TV and say, man, this was a great Zoom. So my hope that, as much as we talk about this stuff and we say diversity and inclusion, and it all ties back to this bill, that we are actually taking action towards this stuff. Like we got to fight back. And don't get me wrong, these conversations and being on these Zooms are a start to that, but it's not the only way. We got to be more vocal, whether it's on a one-on-one standpoint or even in your school, or even if you're afraid to do it, you got to stand out against this. Otherwise, we're in a world of hurt. And what I see from my people right now, and the reason why I'm bringing these comments and I'm bringing it with such a fury is because I see us begging. I see us stealing. I see us borrowing everything, and we don't have any ownership of anything. And that's just what I see in our community. And with bills like that, it prevents us from the education or even hearing what our ancestors have done, the great work that our ancestors has done. It stops that from having the conversation. We can't even put these things in the books now, right? And what my point is that it was never reflected in our curriculum from the first place. That's why we started to talk about this stuff, because we never had an opportunity to have it in the curriculum in the first place. The first time I started to learn about activism and all this different stuff was when I left school. It wasn't when I was in school. I didn't know who Fannie Lou Hamer was when I was, 20 years old. I didn't know who Ella Baker was. I didn't know any of these people. So what I'm saying is, like, we got to be thinking of like really creative ways to infuse important historical moments and historical people into our conversations so that we all can grow, not just, the marginalized people or the people who don't identify with the rest of the world, but we need to find ways to infuse our ancestors and talk about and have these conversations and dialogue, and also agree to disagree in all kinds of shapes, forms, and fashions. So
I'm really glad you said that, Andre. And I think one of the conversations I remember happening in school when we learned about the Holocaust was all these people saying, if I had lived then, I would have done this, and we're in that moment now. So we talk about slavery, we talk about lynching and racial terrorism, we talk about resistance to civil rights. We have to talk about mass incarceration, especially in Iowa. There is a crisis of mass incarceration and disproportionately targeting Black and Brown people. I didn't see a large group of Black and Brown people in Iowa until I went to a prison. 4% of the state is Black, 25% of Iowa's prison population is Black. And so we're in a moment of crisis. And when we talk about history, it's to reflect back on where we are now. And as we talked about earlier, it's 1964, 1965, those laws didn't change. Everything has just evolved over time. And so we're in this moment now where it is an urgent call to action, and we have the opportunity to stand up and do something now. And so I just want to echo what Andre said and highlight its importance.
I also echo gratitude for that. And to share, am a product of the exact whitewashing education that you're talking about. And I can tell you how that harms kids, right? When I talk about my education growing up, I learned about slavery, but I didn't learn about the history of the people from various countries in Africa and tribes in Africa. I never learned that. I learned about the Civil War, but I didn't learn about the triumph and tragedy of Reconstruction. I learned about Jim Crow, but not the horrors of lynching. I learned about the Civil Rights Movement, but not Fannie Lou Hamer and not Ella Baker. I learned about the war on drugs, but not mass incarceration. And it leads me to believe that we're all good, right? We're good. The problems weren't that bad. They were solved anyway. So what's everyone complaining about? And I took that whitewashed curriculum and I put that on my students. So when I'm teaching in the West Side of Chicago and every student in my classroom is Black, I'm asking them both figuratively and metaphorically to submit to my cultural ways. I'm telling them, you need to act right, but I'm saying you need to act white. And I'm causing harm. And that has to stop. And so for the white educators on that call, I implore you that begins with education, yes, but it is transformed through relationships. Who do you know? Who do you love? We cannot be taking our students out into communities of color to help, right? Who are you building relationships with? Who are you partnering with? Those are the things that change. And one thing I want to say is the Iowa teaching population, it lacks diversity. I think it's one of the reasons for our abhorrent numbers in literacy and math scores. 94% of Iowa's teaching population is white. Teachers of color in Iowa, I can imagine, experience incredible hardships And I think that there are some teachers of color on the call, so thank you so much for being here. I've been working on a project with the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, and we've been trying to come up with a framework that states can use to help attract educators of color into the system. But let's be honest, who wants to come into a system that treats them so poorly? Let's look at our statistics on punishments, for example, right? So one thing that you can do, especially if you're a white educator on this call, and if there are educators of color in your building, is support them. I'm putting a resource in the chat right now called If You Listen, We Will Stay, Why Teachers of Color Leave and How to Disrupt Teacher Turnover. We know that when a student, there's incredible statistics. And if you check out the centerforblacked.org, you're going to see some of these there. But we know that if a Black student has a Black teacher before 4th grade, there's something like 33% more likely to attend post-secondary education. We also know that having diverse teachers growing up is good for all students, and there are staggering statistics about that. So we want to talk about action steps, listen to the educators of color in your space, and allow them to speak that truth that they know and have experienced, right? I am not about to tell someone who is a person of color who has had an experience with racism and judge that and say, no, that wasn't racist. That person probably didn't mean that. No, right? If a person of color says it's about race, then it is. That's it. Period. Stop. Be an ally, right? That's another piece of action. And we're going to move into talking with students because this curriculum does change things. And so in Mount Vernon, I saw, after working in the west side of Chicago, seeing my own blinders removed, thanks to some amazing people who came alongside me, I saw my education essentially replaying itself in Mount Vernon, Iowa. So I made change. I started teaching an African-American lit class, taught a social justice class, did a civil rights trip, brought in speakers of color to educate students since they didn't have teachers of color there. And the students that you're going to hear from went through that process. So be encouraged by what they say because it matters to them. And these are the people that are in front of us. So we're going to hear from our students right now and then open it up again to questions from all of us, anyone on the panel. And I also just invite you, if you feel led, to share your story, to share your truth, okay? But we are going to hear from students. And the first student we're going to hear from is Sequa Whirling. I love both these women, by the way, y'all. They're amazing. Sequa is a senior at Mount Vernon High School, and she has played a pivotal role in forwarding conversations about race at Mount Vernon. Sequa was part of the planning team for our Connect, Absorb, Respond, and Empower, or CARE conference, which aims to bring justice-driven conversations into high schools. She's also the president and co-founder of the Students of Color Club in Mount Vernon, and has been working to coordinate opportunities that are amazing for students in the club. Sequa, I am so glad you're here. Welcome again.
Hello.
Hi. My first question for you is, what has it been like for you to have truthful conversations about race in school? That's sort of part one. And then part two, why do these types of learning experiences matter to you? And just so I can speak one thing before you start, I apologize, I meant to say this before. Sequa is not here to speak on behalf of an entire race of people. Sequa is here to share her individual experiences as an individual person, and we value her and we uplift those experiences. So thank you, Sequa. Again, what has it been like to have truthful conversations about race in school? Why do these types of learning experiences matter to you personally?
So to begin, growing up, I didn't really get an education on racial issues or social justice issues at all. Like growing up, my Blackness was often invalidated and just taken away from me, and those conversations were taken away from me. And so when I came to Mount Vernon and I took a social justice class with you, Mrs. Erickson, I changed my whole perspective on everything, and it was very empowering, and I learned a lot. And so when we started Students of Color Club, it was to be a safe place for us to have our experiences validated by other students of color and to talk about issues together. and whatever we were going through. And we wanted to be there for each other and to have these conversations with each other. And yeah, that's one of the reasons it matters a lot to me, because I didn't get that education, as I said, growing up. And I didn't get to have those conversations, those tough conversations and the good conversations, because it really didn't matter when I was younger. So to be able to talk to people about this and to be validated is extremely important to me and to other students. Because growing up at Mount Vernon and my old school, they are predominantly white. So we didn't, like, you didn't hang out with other students of color until we created this club. So.
Thank you, Sequa. Does anyone have a specific question for Sequa? Yes, she is amazing.
I got a comment.
Yeah, do it.
I just want to say I commend you for just, standing up and speaking in front of all of us and, speaking your truth. So I just want to give you a shout out, and for you to be to organize and be amongst your peers that look like you, act like you, talk like you, gave you an opportunity to fail in front of them, how important that is in your development as a person, right? And I just want to give you a shout out. I don't have no questions, but I just want to give you a shout out. And yeah.
And Sequa, her boldness, because she and I got to meet today and talking a little bit about some of the backlash that she faced and starting and continuing to do at this club. And so supporting students like Sequa in your building who are doing this is so critical, making sure that safest space. She talked about being people sitting outside the doorway where the club is meeting and yelling into the room. Like, someone needs to be there to make sure that that's not happening. So that's one way that you can protect.
Definitely. Yeah, we receive a lot of backlash. People telling us, and it's all white students, telling us that it's a racist group, we're segregating ourselves, things like that. And what they don't understand is that they've had their validation their whole lives. They have people to relate to and people to give them what they need, that comfort. Meanwhile, I can go to a white person and say, hey, this person called me that, this person did this to me, and they can give me sympathy, but there's no empathy. And there's a huge difference between those two. You want someone who relates to you, who looks like you, who talks like you, who's seen what you've seen, who's gone through what you've gone through. And that kind of validation is extremely important. So there's also a question. She said, if anything comes to mind, what would you wish a first grade or kindergarten teacher would teach? To begin with, it's kind of basic, but just accept other people for what they look like and how they talk. When I lived with my birth parents, I would often say like, AKS, like AKS instead of ask. And I was told, you don't talk like that. That's not proper. Don't ever talk like that again, because I talk differently, right? And so I had to change that, the way I talked. So I wish that people would teach that the way others talk and look and dress is completely okay. We can accept that because it's part of who they are and their culture, and they don't need to look like the standard in America. So I think that's extremely important to teach, because growing up, I didn't have that. Like, I didn't know why people looked the way they looked or talked the way they talked. It was different. I was never taught that was okay, and that's just who they are, and to accept them for that. So.
Umaru, you have a question for Sequa?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate your courage. I wanted to ask you, or were you able to build bridges between your club and the white students or other student organizations? And if so, how challenging was that?
So we are still working on that. there has been a lot of white students have come up to us and commended us for the group. Like they love it and they're so happy that we have the opportunity to have that club. And we do have a care club, which is students of any color, and they get together and they create changes. They do a lot of activities and stuff like that. And so we're going to talk to them soon and hopefully create a bridge between them as well to hopefully come together and create change together as well. But yeah, we still need, we're just getting started again, so we're still going to have more opportunities to build more bridges. As for how the club got started, we just talked to teachers who we knew were there for us and would help us build this club. And we also obviously talked to the principal of our school and let him know that this is what we wanted. And he said it was okay. And so we got some teachers who helped us organize it, a time and a place, which ours is during school, so it's easier for people to come. And yeah, I just say talk to the people, the principal, maybe a few teachers who can help you get a room and a time together. And we didn't, at the beginning, we were kind of nervous about letting people know, the whole school know about it. But this year recently, we just put it over the intercom and we just said, this is what we're doing at this time. And so, yeah. And they also did send out emails, but we didn't do that this year.
And I just want to lift that up to Sequoia to say that space that you have just to be together is really valuable. And I think teachers can create more space for more racial spaces. So for example, when I took students to the Memorial for Peace and Justice down in Montgomery, which is a memorial to the victims of lynching. And I knew that students of color were going to process that differently than white students and needed some separate spaces. So we did affinity groups, right? Students of color were led by our tour leader, who was a person of color, and I led white students in separate spaces. And one thing that the tour leader shared with me was that the students of color said that they loved being together and realized that they were always afraid to do that in school because they didn't know what people would think. So if you can create a space for your students of color, a safe space to be together, as Sequoia said, to be able to empathize and uplift and encourage each other, I think that's a really important thing that you can do as an ally educator. And I will just ask Nellie a question, but we will, after Nellie talks, we're going to open it up fully to questions again, but I'll share a little.
Leanne, can I just add one more thing quickly? And I just want to name and take space. And I think we see this bill stemmed explicitly out of many of the racial justice uprising in light of things happening in Minneapolis. That doesn't necessarily exclude, right, other racial minority groups we see in our country from the conversation. And if you are working in a school that has a large Latinx population, like, what does that look like to love and support and build bridges and build community with those students? And like, yeah, so just I want to make sure, and that's been brought up in the chat, and I just want to make sure I elevate that to verbally in this space, so everyone is just cognizant of that. And even just like our land acknowledgement at the beginning, we know we have Indigenous students here as well. And just how do we build those bridges? How do we show that and be that safe place so that students can come to us when they want to do something? Because you know what? Kids are brilliant and they're the ones who are bridging these and they're the ones who are leading us so often in this work. And so leaning into them and being a safe place for them to come have that conversation is so important.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bree. We'll talk with Nellie now. Nellie is a freshman at Cornell College, and as a student at Mount Vernon, she was part of social justice, African American Lit, and CARE courses. She was also part of the planning team for the CARE conference, hosted exchange students from our partner school in Chicago's West Side, Collins Academy, where I used to teach, and was with us on our civil rights tour in the South. So Nellie's done taken advantage of almost all of the opportunities that we've had at Mount Vernon. She's also been the secretary and vice president of CARE Club and was highly involved in equity work at Mount Vernon. Welcome, Nellie. Nellie, as we switch to talking to you, we want to acknowledge that your experience with this type of curriculum is different than Sequoia's because of your experience as a white person. And so would you share with us what were some of the most impactful learning experiences you've had and how those experiences have impacted you?
Definitely. One of the most impactful things, well, I've been thinking about this all day. One of the most impactful things to me was during that J term. Well, both J turns, but the first one, like I didn't know who Amzie Moore or Fred Shuttlesworth or Medgar Evers was before you took us down south. And I feel like now I know and I can radiate that out to everybody, but like you shouldn't have to have gone on that trip to have learned that. Like that should already be in the classroom, and you're doing a lot of that. So thank you. And then also when we were planning the CARE conference, you had the whole school read that excerpt from So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo. And that was maybe the first time I remember struggling internally with any material. I think as a white person, I'm used to like if other people groups life experiences don't mesh with like my experiences, I tend to view it as wrong. And that's really shifted for me, and going to a college where it's not as, well, it's still primarily white, but a lot more diverse than Mount Vernon. That's been really helpful to just know that like, okay, I don't have all the answers and I have to sit back and listen occasionally.
I really appreciate that perspective on naming your tension and how experiencing tension was good. It sort of reminds me of going back to the bill, right? Which I think is trying to eradicate the experience of tension in some ways. And I think it's just an example of how important it is for us to feel tension, especially as white folks, right? To do that. So I appreciate that. Are there any questions specifically for Nellie before we open it up? And maybe what we'll do is we'll get questions for Nellie, share just a couple resources with you, and then open it up for the last moment. That's okay. If a question comes up for Nellie later, we will direct it to her. So thank you, Nellie, for sharing your experience.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Bree, why don't we share the resource that we created? And there was a question too about an opportunity to engage with each other. And we have created one for us. So I'm really excited about that. So do you want to go ahead and share, and we'll just show those two resources, and then we'll spend the last.
Let's do it. I'm just getting my ducks in a row as I share here. So a few resources we are really excited to share with you. So one thing that will be emailed out to each of you, just at the email that you use to register for this, we've put together a curated list of different tools and supports to help you as you continue to engage in this work, both personally as you grapple with what this means for you, but also as you dig into actually curriculum and teaching students. It'll have links to connect up with our panelists. So being able to dig into attending some of the sessions Humanize My Hoodie offers and take their Educator as Allies workshop, connect with Stephanie and invite her into your classroom if you're in the Cedar Rapids area. I know she'd love to connect you with other people with similar positions to hers across the state. This resource also contains some information kind of distilled down about what we talked about as it relates to the House File 802. So kind of some of the cans and cannots broken down, a few additional resources published by other agencies across the state of Iowa, and then actually a link to just take you right to the bill. So you can read it, you can look at it. I know all of us, as we were kind of prepping, like printed it off and annotated it and asked questions, and we're like, what does this mean? And Googled some of the legalese in there. So it's just a good tool to have. We then also have a professional, like recommended professional reads for you to just kind of curate your own library and just grow in your own understanding of this. And then we also have some just resource lists bracketed out based on age groups, depending on what you teach. And each of them links to a Padlet that is just full of large amounts of age-aligned resources for your classroom. So that's something we're really excited to share with you. Additionally, I'm going to put in the chat a resource, a Google survey. And we would love and feel very grateful if you would complete this if you are interested in joining a panel, not a panel, a cohort. And it also just giving some feedback for the session. And Leanne, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the cohort explicitly.
There was a question or a comment earlier in the chat, and I can't find it right now, but about the need to work together in this work and to have community in this work and support each other. And Brianna and I are all about that. And so we want to create that space for anyone who wants to be part of it, a space where we can share ideas, a space where Brianna and I can offer trainings, a space where we can bring in guest speakers, a space where we can hold each other accountable to action, right? Learning plus action plus reflection, repeat, right? Those things happen simultaneously, and we need each other. We need each other. We like to say justice work is everyone's work for everyone's good. And we are not islands, and we are not meant to be. So please imagine 54 Iowa educators coming together to consider what it is like to be anti-racist in the classroom, to make real change in Iowa. That about brings me to tears with joy and excitement, because that is the kind of change we need. This is the kind of force we need. We are going to be that tidal wave that wipes out this bill, right? And we can be that. We can be that together. We can be that together. And so if you're just sitting in that tension and that personal tension of what can I do, or what can I do, sign up for this group and be in it together. We would love to have you, and we'll send you more information on that.
Yes, and all of these things we're talking about, information for the panelists, will all be emailed out to the email address that you registered with, as will a recording of this panel.
Mm-hmm. And so we have 10 minutes left, and we want to open this up to general questions for anyone on the panel. Or again, if you feel compelled to share an experience, a thought, or if you've got a whole word for us, we're here for it. So opened up for 10 minutes. And you can do that in the chat, or you can raise hand and we'll invite you to unmute. Nellie, can I lift up a question actually for you? Because I think I do just want you to expand on this a little bit. Why would you say that anti-racist, social justice-driven education is important for white students in Iowa to experience?
I love Mount Vernon, but it was truly a white bubble. And I think being able to have those relationships with like the Chicago people and then the anti-racist education, like going out into the world, everywhere else is not as sheltered as Mount Vernon. So I think having that and being able to know how to interact with people and how to do the social justice work is really important. After seeing all these laws, going to a college where I can still learn about that, I'm especially grateful. And also, like, you've tried to drill it into my head, like years and years, like getting to know it, like truly knowing people want to be known. And that was, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yes.
Let me add something. Thank you, Nellie, for your comments also. I think, yeah, so the uncomfortableness is because we're not having the conversations, right? So the more we keep talking about it, and the more that Nellie and other students and, other white folks can be in these spaces and feel uncomfortable for a little bit, the comfort level starts to feel more comfortable. Like just how Nellie's being able to talk about these things, we all can do that, right? We just got to be in the environment where they're actually happening. And so I commend Nellie for, being in the spaces and wanting to be racist. And, at the end of the day, what we all got to get back to is the root of why we're doing this. We have to all look at each other as humans. Outside of all this conversation and everything, we're all just humans. Like I do the same thing you guys do at the end of the night. Everybody's doing the same thing. No one's different in that sense. So it's like, how do we treat each other that same way when we're out in public? You know, and so I just wanted to add that to what Nellie's has brung up. And I really just get excited when I see young people speaking up and really taking a stance, because if you look back in history and you look at all movements, young people have led every single movement. And if we don't got the young people doing it, we about to be out of here, right? And so we got to have people like Nellie and Sequoia actually speaking up and speaking truth to power. So I commend the young people for what they're doing right now, you know.
Agreed. And to add on that, when I start feeling too comfortable, or if I start feeling like I'm agreeing with people around me too much, that's when I get concerned. So I need to make sure, am I doing things that are outside of my comfort? Am I learning things that are different? Am I doing and learning things that might be different than what I hold or believe? If I'm agreeing with everybody, not to just be contrarian, but when you start agreeing with everything around you, you're in an echo chamber. And so you really have a very small microcosm of people that you're around. And so that's where it's important to have people who are different than you. I recently did an exercise with a group of people where I had them list out their, like the top 10 people that they would talk to if they had, if I have a problem at work, or a problem at home, a problem with my family, and then what are their demographics and how are they like you? How are they different than you? And at the end of the exercise, most of the individuals realized, oh my gosh, we're all the same race. We're all the same familial status. Most of us are the same age. Most of us have the same sexual orientation. Most of us have either no disability or a similar disability. And so when we start to be so much alike to people that are around us, it really narrows down our ability to learn. And so I implore you to make yourself uncomfortable and talk to people you might not want to, and to learn something.
Let me add one more thing, and then I'll sidestep. But racism and all these things that we're talking about, we're the people who receive that. Like, this is a conversation white folks need to be having. Like, you guys need to be really leading the charge for this, but it's not us. We the ones who get racism that happens to us. And so when we actually talk about it, the reason why we're not getting hurt is because you've heard the same thing over and over. But if we got people like Leanne and Brianna actually speaking about it and speaking truth to power about what's actually happening in the community, that's how we change things. It got to come, I think, because we've tried it every other way, right? We've had activists, we've had all kinds of people who fought for equality. Ever since I've been on this earth for 43 years. But we haven't had any white folks actually step up and actually do a lot about what's happened. Like it got to come from you guys. So just having forums like this and having a conversation is enough. We got to actually do action, and it takes you guys to actually do the action.
So I'm going to jump in there now because
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Adding on to that, the uncomfortable conversations, I feel like part of the reason why people say it's uncomfortable is because they don't really want to take responsibility or hear things. Like, I remember specifically in 9th grade, during a class with Mrs. Erickson, she asked people, how many of you guys think you have white privilege? And people were shaking their heads. They're like, no. And it was really interesting to me because I feel like they see that and they think it's something like bad or something that they did that was wrong or something, but it's just how it is. It's just what it is. It's just there. And but it's hard for them to hear because they feel like it's their fault, or that's what I feel like is part of the reason why it's uncomfortable to talk about for other people, because they don't want to hear those things about themselves or accept that. So.
Thanks, Sequa. Iris, you wanted to say something, so go ahead and.
I did. I just wanted to say first, thank you all for doing this. This was really good. I also want to say ditto to Andre, because that's exactly what I was going to say. We do a lot of talking, and it's the Blacks that's doing the talking. And it's going to take for, as I call them, the lighter brighters of my friends to speak up. And one day I was in class and I was reading a book to the kids, and some of the kids says, why we don't have any Black teachers here? You know, they said, well, at least we have Miss Iris. And, but that's it. I was reading another book, and the book was talked about a whole lot of different things, race, gender, and all of that. Now, the students liked the book because it brought rich conversation. It brought the conversation, open, honest dialogue. However, it got pulled because it was uncomfortable for someone else. And so I know that it is the youth that takes the charge. They're doing their thing, and they want to talk about it. They want to know. We just have to be given the access, the permission. And for me, I just do it. Okay. And so if I lose my job because I've done right by educating the students, then I've done my job. Okay. Absolutely. But that's just how I see things. Okay. I work with special ed. So my job is to work myself out of a job. So I work with that motto. I lead by that way anyway, you know. But if we understand that all of us got some bias in us, some racism in us, it's just like Andre said, we're human. None of us is perfect. None. And when we do a heart check on why, when you ask yourself why, check your heart. Because it'll tell you, if you're so uncomfortable, why are you uncomfortable? And then deal with the truth. It's okay. It really is okay. Let's deal with the truth. And now let's try to do something different, because that's the apology. The apology isn't, I'm sorry. The apology isn't, oh, I'm going to go and do this march. No, the apology is the change. Okay. And so when we understand that, that's when we'll see the change. So, but again, I appreciate everyone coming. I thank you all for having this tonight. And I wish I work with youth and in a church organization that's, I'm the only minority. I mean, we got one other family, of course, but you know, I'm a youth ministry leader, and my youth group is majority white. Okay, love my group, love my church, but we actually are taking on that stand this year of working towards a world without rape and justice, but we're working towards mercy and getting rid of that injustice and things like that. And so what you was talking about tonight, I wanted to reach out because I would like for someone to come. That is the challenge that I'm having with our church. I want you to bring and talk about this with my youth, because we need to know, they need to hear it. And like I told them, we need you, because they're not listening to us. We need the people. Listen, I learned a lot of things when I was in college. And it's sad to say that's when I actually learned a lot, was when I was in college. I am grateful for the professors that I had. I learned a lot about me. Hell, I even learned about me as a Black person because I didn't even know. So, you know, I just want to say thank you all. And we got to get it out there. But it is going to take for my lighter brighters to go out there and make it happen. And kudos to those that are doing that.
Thank you, Iris. And if I am here for that, if you want a white person to come and have that conversation, I am totally here for that. Bree and I do equity work in the church as well, because we see the systemic racism in our church spaces. We've walked a whole
Exactly, because people
mile
don't feel
for that.
comfortable coming in there. You're in this Black neighborhood, okay? But everybody in the church is white. And they're older, so they have to get adjusted and used to it. And not everybody likes change. Change is hard. Okay, so not trying to throw it all at them at once, but if I can start with my babies, listen, we got to teach them while they're young.
Mm-hmm.
Catch them then, hey, that's why they're doing their thing now.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Well, thank you all. We want to honor the time, and I know that our panelists have put their contact information in the chat. So if you have further questions for them specifically, or for Brianna and I, or if you have questions for Saquon or Nellie, we can connect you, send your questions along to them as well. So thank you so much for being here. Fill out that form if you think we need to do this again, so you can invite all your friends. I mean, I'm here for it. Y'all here for it, right? Yeah, I'm gonna just assume you are.
OMG, one of my professors is on. I love you.
Oh,
I learned a lot from her. She was one of the professors I was talking about.
That's
oh my
amazing.
God.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Can I ask my panelists, all panelist students to stay on for just a minute after people log off, so we can just talk about a couple of things. But thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful. And as Andre called us, go out and do the work. Don't just talk about the work. Go do the work. Bree, final comments from you.
I just want to quote Miss Iris, the apology is the change, right? That's what I think that's the takeaway from today. And yeah, watch your emails. We'll send you some tools.
Thank you all so
guys.
much.
Oh, let's not just unmute and thank our panelists too. Unmute and give them some love.
Wow. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. You guys are the heroes and the educators. And I want to give a special shout out to Mrs. Myers, who's on the call, and she was teachers at Prairie. So thank you for the amazing work you're doing.
Thank you, everybody. It was great.
You taught my daughter too.
I did.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Night. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Oh, Allison, do you see that?
Aw.
That's awesome. Here, I'll just remove this last person because they may not.
Can this be like a once a month thing? This is fine.
It was a
I
blast.
miss Scare Club.
I know. I know. Thank you guys so much. I just wanted to extend gratitude.
The last person was a Roosevelt mom you just kicked off. Wow,
Oh.
Leanne.
No, thank you. I haven't talked to that teacher in 20 years, and she started private messaging me.
Hey, that's tight.
It's like really, really cool and sweet. So that's wonderful.
Absolutely. That's so cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mrs. Myers.
Mrs. Myers, Lisa Myers.
Here's my youngest daughter's absolute favorite teacher.
She was so
loved her.
sweet.